Hey, how's it going, guys? Hope you're doing well. So today I'm going to be reviewing the last half of the Alan Moore Swamp Thing run. It's been a while since part one, but there's just been a lot of other content I've been putting out. I've been very busy, so reading hasn't been my number one priority, unfortunately. But I'm happy to say I have completed Alan Moore Swamp Thing, and it was a blast. So let's dive into this. Looking first at book four. Of course, this is a hardcover format. So you know, this, I believe, I'm not sure if this exact one's out of print, but a lot of the hardcovers are out of print and are going for ridiculous prices, which is why my book 6 is actually in paperback, because I couldn't find it in hardcover. But when this book is in print, it retailed for $27.99 Canadian or $24.99 US, plus tax, of course. So this is the actual slipcase, right? And we've got that standard matte black with the Swamp Thing on here. That's on pretty much all of them except for the first book, at least from what I've seen. So starting off with book 4, in terms of just looking at its contents, this book had a lot going on, to say the least. I mean, it had, it had a crossover with Crisis on Infinite Earths to begin with. So there was that. There were people finding they called them like sweet potato-ish looking vegetables that fell off of the Swamp Thing, and like experiencing it, and depending on who the person was, they would experience the green. So some people who were more hateful actually felt like they were dying. People who were more happy-go-lucky felt like they'd understood the universe on a whole other level. There was also a story which I thought was really interesting, that was supposed to be similar to, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Winchester house, the haunted Winchester house, where it's like that woman felt like guilt for every single person killed by the Winchester, and she would have nightmares of ghosts coming to her, instructing her to build rooms and keep expanding upon the house. So that was an interesting story, to say the least. And then there was also the Crisis on Infinite Earths event. I can tell that it kind of, for a little bit, interjected with what Alan Moore was going for, but it was interesting to see the Crisis from a different perspective, one of a more horror-esque perspective. I really did enjoy that. There was also this other one that was super creepy. Like, you really get the horror aspects out of this Alan Moore run, where there was like a serial killer who considered himself the boogeyman, and he remembers all of his victims' eyes. Like, if you give him a number, he's like, oh yeah, my 21st victim, my 200th victim, their eyes were like this, a crimson red. Like, he can describe them in depth. Needless to say, he comes in contact with the Swamp Thing. We'll see how good that goes for a serial killer versus the literal embodiment of the green. But yeah, no, the Winchester house story was interesting. There was like a lot of horror in there. It was a really spooky story. I enjoyed it. There was also the introduction of the Parliament of Trees. So John Constantine informed the Swamp Thing that, hey, you're not like necessarily the one and only. There have been other Swamp Things in the past, and they have this embodiment of knowledge. And so Swamp Thing goes searching for this Parliament of Trees for information, maybe even an explanation for his existence. And basically, the only thing they tell him is to, I don't know the exact terms, but it's basically beware of hatred and anger. Or no, beware of power, because power enables anger and hatred, or something along those lines. Basically, just don't abuse the power you've been given. Don't become a monster like everyone perceives you to be. And that comes back later, in the story, where basically, I mean, I don't want to go into it quite yet. That's another book, but it was pretty interesting. But yeah, so basically, the Swamp Thing finds out more about his history. He, deals with some more scary stuff, and it's all leading up to the Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover, because essentially it's like, oh yeah, all this weird stuff is due to Crisis occurring, leaving the spiritual realm in a state of disruption, one that doesn't really allow for any kind of balance. And so we find out that it's basically like this group of like male witches, and they're trying to revive something. We don't know exactly what it is. They just know they're trying to revive something pure evil. And so it's really interesting, because you actually get to see the definition of good and evil almost rewritten. And I know that's so weird to hear or hard to understand, but it's basically like they ask you what is good and what is evil. And in their perspective, it's almost like there is no good, there is no evil. When you look at the cycle of life or the circle of life, is the frog that ate the bug evil for eating it? No, we wouldn't perceive that as evil. Is some kind of predator that kills and eats this frog evil? Still no, that's for its own survival. Is the earth, the ground, evil for absorbing this dead animal's nutrients? Are the herbivores evil for eating the plants that come from these nutrients? Like, it's basically like looking at this entire cycle of life. There is no evil or good within it. There is just life. And I just thought that was such an interesting concept to kind of delve into the concept of, you know, what are good and evil? What defines good and evil? And in nature, or in like the spiritual realm, or in like the the overall scheme of things, is good and evil really that different? Can you see a clear separation in them, or is there a bit of a gray area there? So something I really enjoyed about that book was kind of delving into this more philosophical edges of the story. Now, moving on to book 5. So we've got the slipcover here. Once again, 27.99 Canadian. Yeah, and 24.99 US plus tax when in print. Take the slip off. We got the exact same matte black, unfortunately. It's a little lackluster, but honestly, this is a dark and gritty story, so who needs a colorful and beautiful cover, realistically? I just realized I haven't been showing much art, so I'm going to try to show more art moving forward. But basically, this book, it's kind of like a good continuation of the fourth, in the sense that it draws upon that what is good, what is evil, beware, you know, it's its own twisted version of with great power comes great responsibility, but it's nowhere near that, because it's basically saying like, yeah, you have great power, so just make sure you don't abuse it, kind of thing. But it's in a much darker tone than just you know, when you're a good guy, you should be doing good things. No, this is just because you have the power to do something does not mean that you should. And that is a question that is asked so many times in this story that I appreciate on a whole other level. So in this story, essentially, Abby, the Swamp Thing's love, is exposed for sleeping with him, or like having a sexual-ish relationship with him. And because he's plant-based, they basically try to put her on trial for crimes against nature. And so Swamp Thing, returning from the crisis event, is enraged to find out that they have her held down in Gotham, and they're basically like, yeah, we're not letting you go. You're being held for trial. As far as we're concerned, you're guilty. Like, it was not looking good for her. And so Swamp Thing kind of got really pissed off, and this is where the whole like beware great power and the anger that can come with it, or the ability to install or like emanate this kind of anger or this evil onto others. Right? Beware the dangers that come with power. He unleashes a forced Eden upon Gotham, completely wrecking the city and resetting it to like just plants, basically taking out all electronics. And a lot of people actually kind of get into it. They're like, the world is so much better this way. Why don't we just do this? You know, fruit is plentiful. Water supplies are cleaner than ever. And Batman's there like, this is my city. Like, I'm cleaning it up, not you. But he also understands where the something's coming from. So we actually see a small bit of Batman, which I really enjoyed. And so Batman arranges a pardon for Abby through his many connections. But meanwhile, there's something else going on behind the scenes. Lex Luthor conspires with this other government organization, or unnamed organization, I won't specify, on how to kill the Swamp Thing. Now, they know that the Swamp Thing can connect to the Green, it can create new bodies, it's essentially unkillable. And Lex essentially says, well, I mean, he's just transferring based on some kind of like connection to like this green. So he has this kind of like vibrational frequency or connection with this green. All we have to do is disrupt it, and then he won't be connected to it anymore, and we can kill him off. And so that kind of happened off in the background, and you know, meanwhile, you know, Abby's being released. The Swamp Thing's finally happy. You know, he gets rid of his forced Eden, and needless to say, shit goes down, and I won't say exactly how, but Swamp Thing ends up jumping to an alien planet. Um, and that is a whole other thing. Like, not only does he jump to an alien planet, but he tries to trick himself because he's so utterly lonely. He tries to trick himself into believing that he's there on Earth still. Using his powers, he creates such small, intricate details out of wooden structures that emulate like his hometown, his love life, his friends and relationships. But but as he furthers on into the story, everything becomes corrupted, and he can see the falsities within his own fake story. He see like as it rains, plants start to grow out of the buildings he's made. His fake generated Abby, there's something off about her. He doesn't know what it is. She's just not smiling right. Like there's something off about it. There's something non-personal, something not correct about this world, and he knows it, but he's trying to avoid it. He's trying to keep the illusion going until eventually he just snaps and lays waste to this fake world that he's created, and he realizes that he probably should have never even dabbled in such a concept because something like that can drive a man mad. And so that was really interesting, is kind of just seeing the Swamp Thing kind of struggle with loneliness and with the concept of probably never being able to see Abby or any of the people that he cares about on Earth again, because he's somehow on this planet. He doesn't know exactly where, and he's completely lost. So it kind of just leaves you in this state of wow, like that is a savage way to end a book. I cannot wait to read this book 6 because this story ends up pretty dark there. So that is book 5. Really enjoyable, a lot of dark plot, and some interesting pondering moments to say the least. Now on to book 6. Now, as I previously mentioned, I couldn't get the hardcover format for this one because it is out of print. But this paperback goes for $25.99 Canadian or $19.99 US, although you can often find this discounted on Amazon. So you don't necessarily have to pay for cover price on a paperback like this. This is the final book. It completes Alan Moore's Swamp Thing run, and it kind of just gives you that, ending flourish. Now, one thing I will say is that this 6th book, to me, it felt like a long read. There was an entire issue where it was taking place on Ron with like Adam Strange, and they were speaking a whole other language, and like you could only understand when they spoke English. And holy shit, bro, they really tried to make this hot girl. I mean, it's not the hot girl that we're familiar with, but same like race. Like she's literally just got overalls on. Like you can tell when this book was written, to say the least. But he goes to Ron searching aid. Comes in contact with Adam Strange. Adam Strange being from Earth, so he's like, "Oh, okay, so I have a way to get back to Earth." But there's no use in him returning to Earth unless he can somehow fix this vibrational disruption within him. So he goes in search of other planets. Now, meanwhile, we get to see Abby struggling with the concept of loss. The loss of her father. The loss of Swamp Thing, like Alec, her love. And basically, it just kind of delves a little bit back more into that whole dark, gritty storytelling. She's working at like a retirement home or a home for the old and sick, and she's dealing with all these employees who are doing nothing but trying to hurt like these old people. Like it's very wordy. You will see that. I felt like the first half of this book was definitely a bit harder to get through, but once we start getting into something like this, where Swamp Thing jumped to a planet that was actually it had a conscience, and it was able to also somehow reverse time, trapping him on the planet temporarily, and it kinda had babies with him forcefully. The R word is used directly in this book, to say the least. This is a pretty dark story. Basically, this planet is part of a species that waits for a decent host, mates with that host, and then uses its like information or DNA to create like other versions of its species that are part of whatever it mated with, which was It was disturbing. But you know what? That's what this is about. These stories are meant to be disturbing. Here you can see all the offspring is getting ready to go, and also paragraphs upon paragraphs of reading. So it is a very wordy book, this book 6. But something I found common in Alan Moore writings, such as Watchmen, is that while, yes, it might take a little bit to kick off, once you've gotten there, the story just, I want to say, rolls off the tongue. It's that easy to just kind of consume. So eventually, the Swamp Thing lands on this plant-based planet, although he doesn't consider the fact that these plant-based beings are living. And so when he constructs himself on this planet, he builds himself out of already living beings, and their consciences mold together. And you just kind of see this. It's super disturbing. You basically just see, oh god, look at this. Look at this art here. This is the Swamp Thing screaming. Every single part of him is made up of one of these plant-based beings. Every single part. And so all these plant-based beings who don't speak English are like in great pain and suffering. They're all combining, and they're like, oh my gosh, this isn't what I wanted. Like, meanwhile, different parts of the Swamp Thing are experiencing different things. Certain amounts of these plant-based beings believe that this is the second coming of their god, the O, and it brings them great peace to be part of the Swamp Thing. Others see sides of a relationship. They're melded together now. A couple is melded together, and they know everything about each other. And suddenly, the spark is gone, and they know everything that they need to know about the other person. There's nothing wondrous or mysterious, and the spark is gone, and these lovers basically fall apart once we saw almost unbreakable at the beginning. And we see this plant-based life forms planet has a Green Lantern who helps to save all of his fellow civilians from permanently being part of the Swamp Thing, and he traps the Swamp Thing's consciousness in this vial, and then also using the lantern's key or lantern ring is able to translate and communicate and kind of come to terms with, okay, so this was an accident, how can I help you? Now, of course, the Swamp Thing needs a host temporarily. He doesn't really like just kind of being in this small, I don't know, glass, I guess. So he actually takes over the body of a plant-based being who had passed away, who was an old mentor of this Green Lantern. So you get to see the story of a Green Lantern accepting the death of his mentor. And it is dark and it is sad, but it's also fulfilling because, he gets the second chance to say goodbye to his master. And, man, some of these stories could bring a tear to your eye. And not just that, the Swamp Thing also, I forgot to mention, sent Adam Strange back to Earth and said, can you please tell my love that I'm still alive? And so he explains it to her. He's like, oh yeah, I'm from this other planet. I go on, I think they're called delta waves, and they help me, zeta beams that help me, transmit from planet to planet. And she just thinks he's a lunatic trying to make fun of her, so she, storms off and gets pissed at him. Now here is where the story gets real interesting. We get to see some more interesting concepts. We see the Source Wall, we see some of the new gods, and it is really, really cool. We also get to see these old celestial beings that had previously tried to pierce the Source Wall, and now they're frozen in time, forever, stuck, reliving, or kind of slowly experiencing everything. And so, we've got Metron here. Metron, of course, having the chair and having all that knowledge. I don't know too much about this generation's Metron. I mostly have interacted with the New 52 version. But this version is collecting information and is using this Element X to fuel his Mobius chair. And so he is kind of trying to find a way to pierce the source, because once you pierce the source, you kind of enter this whole new universal understanding, or you unleash this power. And so it's revealed eventually that, first of all, he's run out of this Element X, so now he's stuck. And then Swamp Thing says, I can take the form of a chair. He's like, I was drawn here by something. And we find out that a mother box was calling to the Swamp Thing. And so the mother box communicates to the Swamp Thing and tells the Swamp Thing, because you've mastered the ability to change your vibrational frequencies to adjust to certain environments, you can technically pierce the barrier of the Source Wall. And so Metron, sits down on the Swamp Thing as a chair, and they enter the source. Now, they go through so many different layers, and you can see them kind of struggling with it. until eventually they run into a transmuter, which is like basically this giant guard of the source wall or different parts of the universe. And they get blasted, and then all of a sudden they see everything that's ever existed from every point of view within the source. Like everything that could ever exist. And the Swamp Thing actually sees Abby. I don't know if I would say cheating, but she's like kind of warming up to John Constantine. And so it drives him insane, and he basically says, Abby, you were the one thing that kept me grounded while I was lost out here in space, and now I've lost you. And he literally goes, like, essentially brain dead. Like, he doesn't talk, he doesn't move, he doesn't do anything. He's lost all meaning. And so, Metron, of course, takes good old Swamp Thing back to Planet Apocalypse, where he meets Darkseid. It's found out that he's working with Darkseid to help Darkseid find answers to the anti-life equation. Now, the anti-life equation, for those who don't know, is the equation in which if one holds it, they can essentially rip free will from the people who they expose that equation to. And so Metron's explaining, oh yeah, Swamp Thing saw something that broke him and completely destroyed him. And so Darkseid gets the Mother Box. The Mother Box is scared of Darkseid too. He grabs the Mother Box and says, tell me, what did the Swamp Thing see that broke him? And so he sees, what the Swamp Thing saw of betrayal and like his love basically hurting him and abandoning him. And so then he destroys the Mother Box and he says, thank you, Mother Box. You have assisted me in building the anti-life equation. You've basically given me an element that I hadn't considered up until now. Love. And I just loved seeing Darkseid in the old art style. Like, I love the new 52 Darkseid too. I got a Darkseid statue up here. But, like, wow, getting to see Darkseid, like, just when he's trying to, understand the anti-life equation was super cool. And then, of course, after all that, the Swamp Thing returns to Earth, and he works on assassinating everyone who had anything to do with him dying. Although, surprisingly, there's no mention of him attacking Luthor, which I was kind of surprised about. I kind of expected that to happen. But we see these really dark and gritty ways that the Swamp Thing kills the people who killed or tried to kill him. Like, this guy walks out on his lawn, like, he's a big rich guy, he's got a giant lawn. He walks out on his lawn, and this giant, like, rose thorn bush-based maze, a labyrinth, grows around him, and he is stuck in his lawn, he's lost on his lawn, and it's basically alluded to that he's gonna starve to death, and that he'll never get out. This one guy eats a sandwich, and he becomes a giant fucking tree, so that's something, because, yeah, Swamp Thing, Vertigo, dark and dark and gritty. But essentially, the Swamp Thing returns, and he's like, yeah, Happy, I'm alive. And she's like, oh my gosh, you're alive, that's so cool. And she said, like, as much as sad as it was to live without you, it's good to know that I can exist without you, as impossible as that situation might seem. So, we get to see the strength behind Abby and her dealing with Swamp Things being gone. So, I really enjoyed that. And then we have this entire chapter relating back to the just because you have great power doesn't necessarily mean you should use it. Essentially, in order to get assistance on Ron, the Swamp Thing promised that in exchange for knowledge on how to fix himself, that he would deal with Ron's problem of the lack of crops and, like, because of a nuclear war. And so he basically brought to life the Furna of the entire, like, planet and solved world hunger on that planet. And, meanwhile, while he was connecting back with Abby again, all he could consider was, why wouldn't I do that here? Could I not make this world a utopia, regrow everything that I want to regrow, make this world an Eden on Earth? But then he says, no, I can't. Because the problem with this is if I restore this planet, those who crave upon it and use its resources for their own purposes will abuse my resources, my ability to heal the green. And they will just take as much as they can. They will take limitlessly now, more than they ever would damage the green before. Now they know that there's a way to heal it, and so they take that to advantage. They take that into consideration, and they just basically unstoppably steal the resources of the green. And it just becomes an endless, vicious cycle. And so the Swamp Thing comes to terms of, I don't think that's probably the right thing to do then. And, we get to see the Swamp Thing ponder. Once again, a really big, wordy comic. We get to see him ponder about all the past Swamp Things. Like, oh, the Swamp Things back in the dinosaur age, did they do anything to, make sure that there was ample resources? Did they do anything to stop the impending end of the dinosaur age? No, of course not. Because all the past Swamp Things that could have done something, no matter what, it's the same. There would just be an exponential growth leading to people absorbing the resources just as fast as they're being brought back, and it becomes a vicious cycle. So the end of this story is kind of Swamp Thing and Abby deciding to settle down and kind of just live on their own in like a house built in the swamp, and basically just kind of live happily ever after. Never to be disturbed again. Now, obviously, that's not what happens because there are other runs of Swamp Thing. For example, New 52 Swamp Thing. I'm really excited to dive into that one. I didn't actually buy that one for myself. That was a gift, so that'll be in my next haul video. But yeah, no, this Swamp Thing run honestly was phenomenal. Like I said, Alan Moore's writing, it can be a little slow at times, but it always picks up and leads to an amazing destination. Having that whole concept of, having like limitless or great power, and the fact that those with great power have the ability to also abuse it and it could lead to disastrous consequences is just so interesting to me. Combating the concept of good versus evil, the separation, or in fact the lack thereof, and the fact that they are very much so similar. I thought that was just super interesting. And I know I say that a lot, but I really like philosophy and those concepts, and to kind of work those into a story dark and gritty as the Swamp Thing, and also have a character face all of these giant questions, to be able to take on such a giant question and fit it into a book or just a few issues of a comic book is astonishing to me. It is really mind-bending to even consider that a possibility. To put the concept of good versus evil, and if there's really a difference, into just one or two issues of the Swamp Thing, and to yet somehow also answer the question, or leave the reader wanting more, or leave the reader with some kind of a semblance of an answer, or the ability to answer it themselves, is just amazing. I've never seen or read a story that is so ambitious that it would delve into those questions so easily and so fluidly, so smoothly. I really enjoyed this read. For the entire Alan Moore Swamp Thing, I'd give it at least an 8 or 8.5 for the entire run. I really enjoyed it. Like I said, there were some slow points, and those were a bit rough to get through, but the payoff is more than worth it. I'm really hoping they come out with an omnibus for this, mainly just because I know the absolutes are out there, but omnis are my favorite format, so if possible, if an omnibus comes out, I would like to purchase one. That's how much I like the story, to know that I can get it in the format that I think's the best. If a story means enough to me, I will double dip, and I think that's what I'm going to do with the Scott Snyder, Greg Capullo's Batman. So, yeah, thank you guys for watching this video. Hopefully you enjoyed. Did you enjoy the Swamp Thing? Have you read it yourself? If you did enjoy the Swamp Thing, or if you have read it yourself, let me know what you thought. Do your opinions differ? Did you not enjoy it? If so, why? If you did enjoy it, what were your key reasons why? Maybe they were different from mine. If you guys want to subscribe, make sure to, subscribe, leave a like on the video. It really helps too. That way you can see all my future content coming out. And leave a comment in the comment section below about what I should review in the future. I think I'm going to be tackling Uncanny X-Men soon. So, yeah, I'm really excited for that. Thank you guys for watching the video, and I will see you in the next one. Stay safe and healthy.